I had always believed that life, once settled into its patterns, stayed that way. I had no reason to expect otherwise. At 54, I lived in a world of predictability. The same coffee every morning, the same corner of the couch to read in the evenings, and the same grocery store run on Friday afternoons. It wasn't a bad life, I told myself. But deep down, I knew it lacked something I'd stopped looking for long ago. That Friday started just like any other. I pushed my cart down the aisles, ticking off items on my list: eggs, bread, the yogurt brand I always bought. The grocery store was quiet, the usual hum of life muted by the predictability of the mundane. But then, as I turned the corner to grab a jar of honey, I saw him. He was standing there, holding a jar in each hand as if debating which one to choose. His face was youthful but not boyish, his features sharp and thoughtful. There was an air of ease about him, as though the world hadn't yet weighed him down. I couldn't help but notice the contrast between him and the people I usually saw here. Tired parents, retirees like me, just going through the motions. He didn't seem to belong in this dull scene, and that made him magnetic. I was startled when he turned and caught my gaze. A warm, easy smile spread across his face, and he raised one of the jars in an almost playful gesture. "Do you know which one's better?" he asked, his voice light and inviting. I blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, I always get the local one. It tastes better, I think." "Local it is then," he said, dropping the other jar back onto the shelf. "Thanks for the tip." He placed the jar in his basket, and for a moment I thought that was it. Just a fleeting interaction with a stranger. But as I moved to walk away, he spoke again. "Do you live around here? You seem like you'd know all the good local stuff." His question was simple, but it carried a strange weight. I wasn't used to people striking up conversations with me, much less men who looked like they belonged on the cover of a magazine. I hesitated before answering. "Yes, I've lived here for years. The farmer's market is great for local honey too, if you're ever interested." "Thanks for the tip," he said again, his smile widening. "I'm Liam, by the way." I introduced myself, feeling both flattered and slightly flustered. We exchanged a few more words before parting ways, and as I walked to the checkout, I found myself smiling. It was such a small moment, but it had stirred something inside me, a feeling I hadn't felt in years. On the drive home, I replayed our brief exchange in my mind, the warmth of his voice, the way he had looked at me as though I mattered. It wasn't that I thought it meant anything, not really. But it was enough to make my routine-filled life feel a little less gray, a little more alive. I couldn't help but wonder, why did that moment matter so much to me? Was it just the novelty of someone new? Or was it something more, something I didn't quite understand yet? For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of something unexpected. Something that made me realize just how much I had been yearning for a change, even if I didn't know what that change might look like. That I didn't expect to see him again. People come and go, and our grocery store encounter seemed like one of those fleeting moments destined to fade into memory. Yet, the following Friday, as I reached for the same jar of honey, there he was. Local again. Liam's voice broke through the air, light and teasing. I turned, startled but oddly pleased. "I'm nothing if not consistent." "And consistent is good," he said, his smile as warm as I remembered. This time, our conversation didn't end with just a thank you. We walked the aisles together, our baskets bouncing lightly against our legs as we meandered through casual topics. He asked me about my favorite spots in town, places to eat, where to find good coffee, the hidden gems tourists usually missed. "I've only been here a few months," he said as we stopped near the produce section. "Moved for work and haven't had much time to explore. But I'm starting to like it. People here seem grounded." I nodded, feeling oddly self-conscious under his gaze. "It's a quiet place, but it grows on you." Liam picked up a perfectly round orange and examined it, as if debating its worth. "And what about you? Have you lived here your whole life?" "Most of it," I replied. "It's comfortable." There was a pause, one that felt full rather than empty. "Comfort's nice," he said softly, "but it's also good to shake things up now and then." I didn't know how to respond, so I focused on picking out a head of lettuce, pretending his words hadn't struck a chord. Our conversation stretched longer than I'd expected. By the time we reached the checkout line, I realized I hadn't laughed that much in ages. There was something about him, his energy, his easygoing nature, that made me feel lighter. As we stood in line, Liam asked, "Do you usually shop on Fridays?" I hesitated before answering. "Yes, it's part of my routine." "Good to know," he said with a grin that made my heart do an unexpected little leap. On the drive home, I found myself smiling again, but this time it wasn't fleeting. There was a warmth that lingered, a sense of connection that I hadn't felt in years. In the days that followed, I began looking forward to my next trip to the store in a way that both excited and unsettled me. I caught myself wondering what it was about him that felt so different. Was it his youth, his confidence, or was it simply the way he made me feel seen, like I wasn't just another person in the background? I started questioning myself. Why was I so eager to see him again? Was it wrong to feel this way? Was I imagining something that wasn't there? But no matter how much I doubted, I couldn't deny that something about him had awakened a part of me I thought had long since gone quiet. For the first time in years, life felt a little less predictable, and I wasn't sure whether to embrace it or run from it. The third Friday came with an energy I hadn't felt in years. My usual grocery run had become more than a routine. It was something I anticipated with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Would he be there again? And if he wasn't, why did that thought leave a hollowness I didn't want to admit? I spotted him near the bakery aisle this time, his tall frame leaning slightly as he inspected a loaf of sourdough. When he saw me, his face lit up, and it felt like the sun breaking through clouds. "Hey, there's my local expert," he called out. I laughed, feeling the edges of my nervousness ease. "I see you're expanding your horizons." "Trying to anyway," he said. "What's the verdict? This bread or that one?" We slipped into our usual easy banter, wandering the aisles together like we had known each other for years. But this time, something felt different. The way he looked at me lingered longer, and his words seemed to carry an undertone that made my pulse quicken. As we stood in front of the spice rack debating whether fresh ginger was worth the trouble, his hand brushed mine. It was so fleeting I almost convinced myself it hadn't happened. But the heat that lingered on my skin told me otherwise. "Thanks for the tip," he said, his voice lower than usual. "You've been a lifesaver for a guy still figuring this town out." "It's no problem," I said, trying to sound casual, though my heart was anything but. We parted ways at the checkout as always, but something had shifted. Driving home, I couldn't shake the way he had looked at me, like I was more than just a friendly stranger. That evening, as I sat in my usual spot on the couch, I felt a strange restlessness. I replayed our conversations in my mind, dissecting his words, his expressions, the moments when his gaze had lingered just a little too long. And then it hit me. I liked him. Not in the way you like a casual acquaintance or a neighbor you wave to on your morning walk. No, this was something deeper, something that scared me. He was younger, so much younger, and the thought of what people might say made my stomach churn. I could hear the whispers, the raised eyebrows, the inevitable questions about why a woman my age would ever entertain feelings for a man like him. I tried to reason with myself. It's just a crush, I thought. A silly, fleeting thing. He's kind, charming, and yes, handsome. But that doesn't mean anything. People can be nice without it meaning more. But even as I tried to dismiss it, I couldn't ignore the way he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. What if I'm wrong? What if he sees me as just a nice older woman helping him navigate his new town? Am I foolish for feeling this way? Or am I just scared to let myself believe in something that feels impossible? I didn't have answers. All I knew was that Liam had become more than a face I looked forward to seeing. He had awakened a part of me I thought had gone dormant. And that realization both thrilled and terrified me. The week dragged on like an eternity. Every time I thought of him, his easy laugh, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, I felt a warmth spread through me. But just as quickly, doubt crept in, wrapping around my thoughts like a heavy fog. By Friday, I was both eager and hesitant as I walked into the grocery store. Part of me hoped to see him. The other part dreaded what I might feel if I did. It wasn't long before I spotted him near the dairy section, leaning casually against his cart, scrolling on his phone. He looked up just as I approached, and there it was, that smile that made my chest tighten. "Hey, thought I might miss you today," he said, as though our weekly encounters had become just as important to him as they had to me. "Here I am," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. We walked together again, our conversations flowing as effortlessly as ever. But today I couldn't ignore the undercurrent of something deeper. When he laughed, it felt like the world around us faded. When he spoke, I hung on every word. And when his hand brushed mine as we reached for the same item, it sent a spark up my arm that left me momentarily breathless. "You okay?" he asked, his brow furrowing slightly. "Yes, just lost in thought," I said quickly, my cheeks flushing. But the truth was, I was anything but okay. Every moment with him only made my feelings grow stronger, and the weight of them was becoming impossible to bear. After we checked out, he walked me to my car. As I loaded my bags into the trunk, I felt his presence beside me, close enough that I could smell the faint hint of his cologne. "You know," he said, leaning against the side of my car, "I really enjoy these little grocery runs with you. It's nice having someone to talk to." His words were simple, but the way he looked at me, steady and sincere, made my heart ache. Did he mean it as just a friend? Or was there something more in his tone, in the way his gaze held mine? I smiled, though my chest felt tight. "I enjoy them too." As I drove home, tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. I hated how vulnerable I felt, how much power these emotions held over me. I had spent so many years convincing myself that I was fine, that I didn't need anyone, that love was a thing of the past for me. And now here was Liam, shattering every wall I had built with nothing more than his kindness and a smile. Am I setting myself up for heartbreak? Does he see me as anything more than a friendly face? And if he doesn't, can I live with this ache inside me? That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling as questions churned in my mind. Was it selfish to want more? Foolish to think that someone like him could ever see me as more than just an older woman who happened to be nice to him? But another thought lingered, quieter yet persistent. What if I'm wrong? What if there's a chance, however small, that he feels it too? Am I brave enough to find out? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing. Liam had reignited something in me I thought I'd lost forever. And whether I wanted to admit it or not, I wasn't sure I could let that go. The days that followed felt heavier, as though I was carrying around a secret too big to ignore. I couldn't stop thinking about Liam, his smile, the warmth of his gaze, the way he made me feel seen and heard in a way that was both comforting and disorienting. It was becoming increasingly difficult to separate my feelings from the reality of our situation. The thought of him never left my mind, even when I tried to focus on other things. My routine, once so safe and predictable, now felt like a cage. I was aware of the mundane nature of my days more than ever, and it was suffocating. But then the idea hit me. Maybe I could invite him over. The thought startled me. At first, I pushed it aside, too afraid of what it might mean. What if he didn't feel the same way? What if he misunderstood my intentions? But as the days wore on, the idea began to feel less like a sudden impulse and more like a need, something I had to do to either confirm or put to rest the feelings that were quickly consuming me. I didn't know what I expected to happen once he came over. A drink, perhaps, or another quiet conversation, just like our trips to the store. But there was also a part of me that wondered, what if something more happened? What if this connection we shared could evolve into something deeper? I wrestled with myself over the decision. What would people think? What if he only saw me as a friend, someone to talk to in the aisles, someone who was there in the moment and nothing more? The fear of rejection, of his indifference, kept me from making the move. But in the end, it was my desire to see him, to explore the chemistry between us, that won out. The next time we met in the store, I took a deep breath and found the courage to ask. "Liam," I said, my voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in my chest. "Would you be interested in coming over to my place sometime? I'm making dinner this weekend, and I thought, maybe you'd like to join me." I was aware of how casual I sounded, but the underlying vulnerability was impossible to hide. The seconds stretched on as I waited for his response, my heart pounding in my chest. What if he said no? What if he was just being polite all this time, and I had misread everything? To my surprise, he smiled, a warm, genuine smile that made my breath catch. I'd like that a lot." The relief that washed over me was almost overwhelming. His words didn't just reassure me. They sent a wave of hope crashing through me. Maybe this was something more. Maybe he saw me the way I had started to see him. We set the date, and I went home that night with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I wondered what it would be like to have him in my home, To share a space that had always felt so ordinary, now suddenly infused with the promise of something new, something unknown. I spent the days leading up to our dinner preparing with a strange sense of anticipation. I wanted everything to be perfect, though I knew that perfection was impossible. It wasn't the meal that mattered, or the way the table was set. It was the chance to finally explore the bond that had been growing between us, to see if there was a spark in his eyes that matched the one in mine. As the evening approached, I couldn't help but wonder, what would happen when we were alone together, no distractions, no walls between us? Would our connection deepen? Would the feelings that I had tried to suppress finally be realized? And most of all, I wondered if he would truly see me, not just the older woman, but the woman who had rediscovered a part of herself she thought she had lost. The night of the dinner arrived with a mixture of nerves and excitement. I had spent the afternoon preparing, putting together a simple meal that I hoped would create the right atmosphere. As I set the table, I tried to quiet the racing thoughts in my mind. Would it be awkward? Would I say the wrong thing? When the doorbell rang, my heart skipped a beat. I straightened up, quickly smoothing my dress, a nervous smile tugging at the corners of my lips. I had chosen something simple but flattering. A little black dress, nothing extravagant, but enough to make me feel confident. I opened the door to find Liam standing there, his hands tucked in his pockets, a soft smile on his face. The way his eyes lit up when he saw me made my stomach flutter. "Wow," he said, his gaze lingering just a moment too long. "You look amazing." I couldn't help but laugh softly, feeling a warmth spread through me. "Thank you," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." He stepped inside, and I noticed the way he took in my apartment. The small, cozy space that had once felt so mundane now seemed different with him here. His presence filled the room, making it feel warmer, more alive. As we sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily. It was just like our usual chats, but there was an unspoken tension now, a quiet anticipation hanging between us. Every time our eyes met, I felt a spark. When his hand brushed mine as he passed the bread, I couldn't ignore the way the simple touch made my skin tingle. After dinner, we moved to the couch, where we continued to talk about everything and nothing. But as the evening wore on, the conversation slowed, and the silence between us became heavier, more intimate. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, and it made my pulse quicken. I wondered if he felt it too, the magnetic pull between us that had only grown stronger over the past few weeks. "You know," Liam said softly, his voice low and deliberate, "I've really enjoyed getting to know you." I swallowed, trying to steady my breath. "I've enjoyed it too. More than I thought I would." There was a pause, and then in one swift motion, he leaned in closer. His lips brushed against my cheek, soft and gentle, sending a shiver down my spine. I froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. But before I could gather my thoughts, he pulled back slightly, looking at me with a mixture of uncertainty and something else, something deeper, something I hadn't expected. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, as though he'd misread the moment. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, but I didn't want him to pull away. I wanted to feel the warmth of his closeness, to explore this connection that had been simmering between us for so long." "No, it's not that," I replied, my voice shaky. "It's just, I wasn't sure what to expect." He didn't say anything more. Instead, he closed the small gap between us, his hand gently touching my arm. This time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. His touch felt like a promise, a reassurance that we were both ready for whatever came next. The moment hung between us like a delicate thread, fragile yet electric. I could feel the pull toward him, and this time, I didn't shy away from it. I leaned in, my heart racing as I closed the distance between us, allowing my lips to meet his. The kiss was slow at first, tentative, as though we were both testing the waters. But as the seconds passed, it deepened, becoming more urgent, more alive. I could taste the sweetness of his breath, feel the warmth of his skin against mine, and I knew in that moment that I was no longer just a woman lost in a dream of what could be. I was a woman who had found something real, something worth fighting for. We pulled away slowly, both of us breathless, our foreheads resting against each other. For a moment, neither of us spoke, but the words we didn't need to say hung in the air between us. This was it. This was the beginning of something neither of us had expected, something neither of us could control. And I didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in years, I felt alive in a way I hadn't thought possible. The days following that night were a blur of emotions. Liam's presence had become a constant, and each moment we shared was both exhilarating and terrifying. As I lay in bed late at night, I found myself reflecting on everything that had brought us here. The quiet moments, the lingering touches, and now, the kiss that had left me breathless. I thought about the years between us, the gap that had once seemed so vast, and how those years now felt insignificant in the face of what we shared. I had spent so many years convincing myself that love was something that belonged to the young, something that faded with age. I had convinced myself that passion, connection, and intimacy were things I had long passed by. But Liam had shattered those beliefs, slowly and steadily, until the walls I had built around myself crumbled. There were still moments when doubt crept in. I couldn't help but wonder if I was being selfish. Would he regret this? Would he eventually realize that we were from two different worlds, and that our connection was fleeting, bound to be torn apart by time and the expectations of society? But then I remembered the way he looked at me, the way his eyes softened when I spoke, the way he touched me as if I were something precious. I had never felt more seen, more alive. He made me feel not just wanted, but needed, in a way that I hadn't felt in years. I spent the next few days in a quiet introspection, trying to make sense of everything. The age gap, the differences in our lives. How could I reconcile that with the way my heart raced whenever he was near? I had always been cautious, always protective of my heart, and yet now, I found myself falling for him in a way that defied reason. What did it mean for us, this relationship we had started to form? Could love truly transcend the boundaries that society had set for us? Could passion and connection endure in spite of the years that separated us? I wanted to believe that it could. I wanted to believe that love was a force that didn't care about age or time, that it could flourish between two people who were open to it, no matter how unlikely the circumstances. And yet, I couldn't shake the fear that this was too good to be true, that I was living in a dream that would soon shatter. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't turn back now. Liam had opened something inside me that I had long ago buried, a part of me that was still capable of desire, still capable of dreaming. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I thought about our moments together, about the way we had become each other's solace in a world that often felt lonely. What was this connection, if not love? It might not look like what I had imagined it would when I was younger. It might not conform to the norms and expectations that had been drilled into me for so many years. But it was real, and I couldn't deny it anymore. I wasn't sure where this relationship would lead, but I was willing to take the leap, to let go of the doubts that had held me back for so long. For the first time in years, I was ready to embrace the unknown, to embrace the love that had found me when I least expected it. The world might have its judgments, but I didn't care anymore. All that mattered was that I had found something I didn't think was possible, something that was all mine, something that was worth every risk. Love, I realized, had no expiration date. It didn't care about the number of years that separated two people. It simply existed, in its own way at its own time. And as I closed my eyes, I knew with certainty that this was only the beginning. That it's strange how love has a way of showing up when you least expect it. I had spent so many years trying to convince myself that it wasn't meant for me anymore, that it belonged to the young, the hopeful, the carefree. But here I was, in the midst of something beautiful, something I had never anticipated. And as I looked back on the journey that had brought me to this point, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Liam had not only brought joy into my life, he had brought me back to myself. The woman I had forgotten in the routine of everyday life. The woman who was capable of desire, of passion, of love had reawakened. It was like a light had been turned back on, illuminating the parts of me that had been buried under years of caution and self-doubt. I had spent so much time worrying about what others would think, what society would say about a woman of my age falling for a man so much younger than me. But in the end, their judgments didn't matter. What mattered was how Liam made me feel, how he saw me, not just the years, not just the wrinkles or the gray hair, but the person I still was beneath it all. He had given me the courage to step outside of my comfort zone, to embrace something new, something wild, and something real. And though I didn't know where our journey would take us, I knew that it was worth following. Every laugh we shared, every moment of tenderness, every touch, each one was a reminder that love in any form was a gift, and it was never too late to accept it. We didn't have to explain ourselves to anyone. We didn't have to fit into the boxes that the world tried to place us in. All that mattered was that we had found something pure, something unspoken but understood. I had learned that love doesn't know age. It doesn't care about numbers or time. It cares about the connection that forms between two people, about the way they make each other feel, about the way they show up for each other, no matter the obstacles. And as I stood on the edge of this new chapter in my life, I felt a sense of peace. I was no longer afraid of what others thought or of the risks I had taken. I was embracing my truth, my heart, and the love that had bloomed when I least expected it. The world might try to define love, to put boundaries on it, but I had learned that love is as boundless as we allow it to be. And at 50, I had found something I never thought possible. I had found myself, and in doing so, I had found the courage to love again. And that was enough.